I haven't caught up with it in a while, but isn't Tesla trying to roll out their own insurance product to insure their own cars from a maintenance standpoint and also from a
So
liability standpoint?
Tesla has partnered with different carriers around the world to create a unique product for Tesla. They would like to have a simplified, streamlined process for buying insurance. And so they're looking to do the same thing in the US. So they did a partnership with Liberty Mutual, but it doesn't necessarily, it's a little different than some of the other countries. So I think it was in Hong Kong where they have a big program with AXA, I think. Yep. But again, you're going to start to see a lot of things that are happening in the auto space. When you looked at car share a couple years ago, you know, peer-to-peer and general car sharing wasn't so much, right? I think Turo had maybe, you know, or there was Get Around and Turo, and I think in some of those discussions, one of those companies had maybe 2,500 users like a few years ago, and now they're over, you know, 100,000, 200,000. So big growth. Now, when you look at the population of general insurance and that, is it big? No. But again, you're looking, it's a completely different model. And when you start looking at it, it's not a typical car, it's high utilization. So one of the other companies that we worked with is Tesla. How many have heard about Tesla? Tesla is an LA-based company. It's a startup. They do city-to-city transport with Teslas. Interesting. So what? Why does the risk change? Well, if you think about it, Teslas have partial autonomy. So their whole premise is that their driver gets on the highway and puts it in partial autonomy. So if the car is theoretically, as they say, 50% safer, 70% safer than a human driving it, and that's 90% of the trip, does that act the same as a taxi? No. Should it be priced differently? No. So it's, again, looking at things from a new lens and a different perspective, and how do you work with them. So for me, it was really important to look at, I get motivated through looking at the lens in a broad way. So not only what's happening in insurance, but what is taking off and what's happening at a macro level on other sides. And in different industries, how do you then apply things within insurance? And then how do we work with startups and start to be creative and get startups into a legacy environment? How does that then work? How do we partner? How do we build that relationship? And how, when I was working in the legacy company, is how, when you work with a startup and you're in a legacy company, that little startup could be just swallowed whole by like the request from a legacy company, right? That legacy company might give them an NDA that's 30 pages. And they'll be like, why don't you give this to your legal counsel? And you're like, well, I don't have a legal counsel. Like, you know, like we have one lawyer and we have to ask for their time. And so it's about thinking from the startup, like how is that going to work for them? And how do we make it easy? And how, now on the flip, you know, the startup has to prove that they can scale and that they have a product that works and it can go national and et cetera. But, you know, it's working on both sides. From the legacy side, what does one want? And from the startup side, how do you solve the problem for the legacy? And then how do you work together to make that happen?
That's a great segue into the startup conversation, but we'll take some audience questions before. Yeah.
A number of legacy companies, in my experience, they're taking different roads, right? Some are doing a lot of innovation more in-house and focusing on developing products or efficiencies and not going as much into startups or investing in startups or new products from startups. And other companies are much more focused on sort of outsourcing and trying to find innovation outside. I'm not sure what Farmers did, but what do you think is sort of the better approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about taking a good look at within the company and what is the skill set that exists there. And so sometimes also, like when you have an innovation group and you build a product, you build a POC and the POC is working and you're like, great, it's time to expand. And the business says, great, we're going to expand it and we're going to put the existing product managers on it. What will happen then? The product will likely die. And why is that? Because it's a different mindset. When you're thinking innovatively about, you know, how do you change things that have been done the same way for 50 years? And how do you create new processes? And how do you constantly look at evolving that and creating new systems and new processes? You have to have that mindset to keep it going and keep it advancing. If you take an innovative product and you put it in an existing mindset of product management that is like, just keep the wheels on the road and just keep doing the same thing month to month, then it gets stale, it doesn't move, it doesn't keep evolving, and they generally will falter. So in those cases, then sometimes it's better to go external, to have maybe a creative side that can continue that building as you start bringing that in-house. But it's really, really important to start changing culture and about changing mindsets, about saying, how do you build the mindset of continuous change? And again, it gets back to shiny ball syndrome, right? You build something, it's great, but it has to have a lot of work to keep it going. You just can't hand it and say, okay, go, there's the product, and now we're going to go build this, and no attention is on what was given, because it has to build on its own. It has to have that momentum and that belief and drive internally to make it succeed, I believe.
Any other questions?
Can you talk about peer-to-peer car sharing? I know Maven is in the news today.
Yeah.
Maven's the GM peer-to-peer car sharing program.
Yeah, so so Maven announced today that if you have a GM car, that they're going to facilitate doing peer-to-peer car sharing on their platform. Pretty exciting. So, and again, and Tesla is looking at doing this too. So it's not new. And if you look at some of these models of peer-to-peer, let's see, what was the name? There's one very big one, now I've forgotten, but there's a very big one in Europe, and they have something like 4 million users. And if you look at the growth rate, very hockey stick. Like, it's just boom. And you look at the potential here. So Waze did a platform of car sharing as well. And so you're saying, what does it really take to create a platform to enable it? Not that much. So Maven started doing their own cars and sharing it, and then doing platforms of doing programs with rideshare companies, where you could do you could go rent the car for a week and become a Lyft driver. And then the payment of that was linked to your Lyft account, so as you made money, it just paid for the car. And if you did enough rides with Lyft, you didn't have to pay the premium of the car. Did that ever exist before? No. Does insurance cover for short-term rentals like that? Sometimes, not in the traditional way. But you look at different programs, and some are, you have commercial fleets, and so as you start to look at some of these numbers, you have your get-arounds and your Turos, which are peer-to-peer, so it's individuals who have their car and they say, hey, I want to make some money, and they put it on these services. Why does that work? Because you only have to rent it for less than half the month, and it pays for your lease. So are people going to change what they buy? So let's say they wanted to buy a Tesla, but they say, I can't afford a Tesla. But you could do peer-to-peer sharing. And when you're a consultant and you're not home for a week, you're going to rent the car for a week, and now you drive your Tesla for free. Interesting. Would you now be doing it? Not for everyone, but some people might. And so it starts to say, why could it work? And why would it work? The same reason why your Ubers and your Airbnbs took off is so Robin Chase, she started Zipcar, and she has a book, and it's great. And it talks about like the sharing economy and why these things have succeeded. And it's because you're taking an unused capacity, an asset that is being unused, and you're monetizing it. So you had cars that you were not using, but you had extra time. Do you want to make some money? Sure. So you have this like new sharing economy of like people that just have some extra time and they're just going to drive around. You have a spare room in your house. You have a spare house that isn't being used. You could sit there and not make any money, or you could. Now you have a car. You're at work all day, right? Do you want to rent your car out for the time that you're sitting at your office? So now maybe you don't have to pay for that lease payment, it pays for itself. What if you could do that and your car would be, as part of the terms, your car would constantly be serviced, would constantly have gas, and it would constantly be clean? Now would you do that? What if you were covered by any insurance, that if there was any damage while the car was being rented, it would be covered? Does it change your perception? And it's not so much about what you or I might choose, but it's who's using it and what do they want to do? Because sometimes also the lens is tinted by what you as an individual would do. So the same as when we were looking at rideshare early on, and people said, you know, generally it was an older group of individuals, older male, same as what is in most carriers, right? And the vision was, no, I like to drive. I have my sports car and I want to drive my sports car. I would never be driven. I would never get into a car with someone and have trust with that person. I would never do this. I would never do that. Awesome. What about your kids' kids? Do they? Oh yeah, they just rented Maven last weekend. They loved it. They're going to do it again. Yeah, they just did Turo. They did this. Ah. So it's again about shifting mindsets and who's using them and how are they growing. So a lot of these car companies, they're testing a lot of things. And so is it all going to work? No. But, you know, they're learning. BMW, for example, did a car sharing platform of BMW-owned fleets. And they had it in several markets, and one was in San Francisco. They exited San Francisco because it wasn't successful. Why was that? Because they had a lot of problems with parking. So, you know, you had to pay for a certain parking, and then the residents were unhappy because the parking was always covered by that car, even though the car wasn't there. They weren't happy because they were getting tickets because people were parking in other places. They were getting towed. So, but did that mean that they quit and they gave up? No. They looked at it. They rebranded. I think they did a deal with Daimler, I think, for one of these. But they merged with Cars to Go. I think they did an agreement with, and they launched in more cities, and they're expanding. You look at Maven. You look at what all these other companies are doing. What Tesla is going to start doing with their fleet. It can be meaningful.
Anyone else? Brett, I think. Yeah, of course.